Hi, Baconhair Animated here. Today, we are going to talk about how a young military man was forced to become Guest 666. Like, subscribe, and comment for more videos. This story took place in an ordinary town, Roblox. On that unusual day, my classmates quietly sat in class at school and were doing their things. Max was attentively listening to the teacher. John was playing on his phone. Archie and John were playing cards in the back row. And Steve was looking out the window, waiting for the bell in order to finally go home and play on the computer. And when the teacher said the long-awaited phrase, "The lesson is over," Steve and his friends rushed home. The guys paused to say goodbye at the place where their ways diverged. They didn't know yet that the next day would change their lives forever. What are you going to do today, Steve?
Maybe I'll play in League of Legends. My father is returning from a business trip. We are going to have a family dinner.
You must have forgotten doing your homework. Max suddenly got in.
Only such losers like you, Max.
Don't forget about doing homework, Steve snapped. Everybody laughed and said goodbye. The rest of the day, Steve spent as he'd planned. In the evening, he and his family gathered at the table, and they were already about to start their dinner when a sudden call interrupted them. Steve wondered who it could be, but went to pick up the phone. A deep male voice came from the phone.
"You'll die tomorrow."
Steve was at a loss.
Who are you?
But there were only beeps in response.
It's definitely Max, who decided to take revenge for today.
Well, we'll see tomorrow, Steve thought, and calmed down.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
Max, what was it yesterday? Have you forgotten how it feels to be dived into the toilet?
What are you talking about?
Stop with this comedy. Confess. Did you call me yesterday with your stupid joke?
Max stared at him blankly.
So, was it you?
Steve's voice suddenly trembled, and sweat came onto his forehead. What did they tell you yesterday? Steve stared gloomily at the floor.
That I will die today.
Everyone looked at each other, and then they burst out laughing, sharply.
What a stupid prank! And you believed it?
John slapped Steve on the shoulder.
Don't be afraid. Someone just decided to joke.
Steve felt much better.
Yes, you're right.
The lesson began, and everyone forgot about that stupid joke. During the lesson, Steve decided to run to the toilet, but for some reason, didn't return for a long time. At first, the guys did not suspect anything, but later, they went to check. Approaching the toilet, they saw bloodstains on the door, and when they entered the stall, they saw a terrible picture. Their friend Steve was lying in the toilet, in the blood. The inscription, Guest 666, was written on the wall of the toilet with a spray can. The adults immediately came running and called the police. Later, from the news on the internet, it became known that the cops who arrived briskly got down to business, cordoned off the territory of the toilet, and began collecting evidence. However, throughout the entire process, they were hampered by a group of school children shouting that their friend knew about his death. On that day, the children were still forced to sit in the classroom, and then were allowed to go home. They were silent on the way, and only when it was time to say goodbye to each other, they seemed to burst.
Was he right?
Max panicked.
I have no idea.
I don't like all this.
I wonder what the cops will dig up there.
But then someone heard a phone ringtone. All abruptly became silent and looked at John. He reluctantly picked up the phone and put it on speaker. The same voice spoke the same words.
"You will die tomorrow."
This time, everyone heard it. There was a depressing pause.
What does it mean?
John exclaimed.
Will I be killed now? You've all heard it.
Let's stick together, Max suggested suddenly, so it will be difficult to catch us one by one.
Oh no, I'm going home. My dad is a military man. He will protect me.
But Max didn't manage to finish, as John had already fled. The guys shrugged their shoulders and went home. The next day, the guys found out that John was missing. After school, they immediately went to his house to find out the details, but there was already a bunch of police officers near John's house. "Excuse me, but what happened here?" Max asked a policeman.
Oh, aren't you those morons from school who were talking some kind of nonsense?
Asked the policeman, starting to laugh and point them out to his friends.
But it's true,
Din shouted.
They also called him yesterday and said that he would die today. They were predicted to die by telephone.
Watch less horror films, boys. What are you doing here, officer?
Suddenly, next to him, appeared one serious policeman.
Yes, the kids are talking about murder again. What murders?
The man asked suddenly, with obvious interest.
They say both guys were called before death and told that they would die. Well, I tell them they should go home and read books. Interesting,
said the policeman.
Okay, guys, you really have to go.
Arriving at his office, the policeman was very interested in this case and wanted to restore justice at all costs.
There must be some kind of connection between the victims,
he thought, relying on his knowledge from university and, of course, detective series. He quickly made inquiries and...
Oh, this is it!
He suddenly yelled, not thinking that it was already 2 a.m. and was about to rush to the phone, but came to his senses. The next day, he phoned the parents of the guys and gathered them in his office.
Well, I understand how difficult it is for you now, but still, there is a risk that these cases are connected and may continue. What can connect you? Maybe a place of work or something.
Everybody kept silent, as if they knew, but didn't want to speak.
What's wrong with you?
Sorry, but this is all complete nonsense. I don't understand why we were gathered here.
One mom started, but she was interrupted by another sudden call. Everyone looked anxiously as Din's father picked up the phone. From the phone came the crying voice of his son.
Dad, the stranger called again and said that I would die tomorrow.
Calm down, son. Everything will be fine. I will soon be.
Din's father hung up, and everyone was already looking guiltily at the floor.
But we mustn't tell, otherwise we will all be killed.
Mr. Jones sitting in his office and reflecting on this meeting. He understood that he was at a dead end and that this was a serious matter. Suddenly, as if hearing his desperate thoughts, someone called. It turned out to be an anonymous person who gave him the information he needed. It turned out that all the parents worked at the secret base, Black Penguin. Mr. Jones was damn happy about the new information. He also received the details of the victims' calls. Surprisingly, before death, all the victims were called by a certain number, which is especially short. It consisted of only 3 digits, 666. Quickly checking the number in the base, the policeman found the phone and its location. To his surprise, the technique pointed to the forest. In the morning, the policeman reported the incident to work, to the sheriff. However, he rejected his version.
No.
But why? The parents of another missing child this morning are simple farmers. What secret base? Mr. Jones fell silent and didn't even know what to say. After leaving the sheriff's office, he immediately went to talk to the family of the disappeared. Influenced by grief, the parents nevertheless revealed the secret. It turned out that the parents' farmers were doctors, and they all worked at the base, where experiments were carried out on humans in an attempt to create a Superman. When everything was ready to create the Superman, and even a person was chosen for this role, something went wrong, and he died. Then the case was hushed up. Steve's father put his hand to this. The rest pledged to remain silent, under threat of death. Having learned all this, Jones immediately gathers a detachment and goes to the secret base, where the GPS pointed him. He drives at full speed, but on the way, they broadcast on the radio that the next schoolchild was predicted an imminent death by telephone. At the base, everyone was already dead, and on the wall was also the inscription, Guest 666.
No!
Shouted Mr. Jones. And then the sheriff called him.
Jones, the boy has been kidnapped. We managed to get on the tail. The chase is in progress.
Mr. Jones didn't even listen to the end. A plan came into his head, but then suddenly an SMS came to his phone.
Come alone, or I'll kill them. Here are the coordinates.
Taking out a GPS navigator, he again checked a number there and followed the trail. Mr. Jones came to a small hut in the woods. He walked into it. There, the kidnapper was already waiting for him, a man in a black robe. His eyes were burning, and he was wearing the bandage of Guest 666.
Drop the gun, or I'll kill them all.
Okay.
You came alone, as I asked. You know, maybe you are still not like them.
What do you need? Why are you doing this?
Believe me, they deserve it. I was just a soldier. They wanted to create a Superman, but they created a monster, since they themselves were still monsters. As soon as something went wrong, they began to spit on me. They saved themselves, but I survived and gained unprecedented strength. This is why I was able to kill and kidnap all these children. Help me deal with them and restore my good name so that I am no longer an intruder here.
You still have a chance to atone for your sins. Do you need all these deaths? You probably just wanted to be happy. Do not become like them.
Guest 666 closed the hut door and clenched his fists. The policeman already thought it was the end, but then suddenly he moved and said,
Yes, you are right.
The maniac looked at the policeman, almost with tears in his eyes.
Listen to me, policeman. Give me your word that if I let the boys go, you will put these crazy scientists in jail for what they did to me.
The policeman gave his word, and Guest 666 said,
The boys are here, in the basement. You can take them away.
But as soon as the policeman moved towards the basement, Guest 666 pointed his hidden pistol at him and fired. But the policeman was not so simple. He put on a modern body armor and therefore boldly rushed at the maniac without fear of a bullet. Guest 666 froze in surprise. The policeman knocked him down, and there was a fight. Mr. Jones showed his hospitality perfectly and punched the guest in the face so that he finally passed out. The policeman quickly tied up the maniac and ran to free the guys, calling for reinforcements along the way.
Whoa. Hello?
But when he returned to his place, the guest was no longer in the house. He disappeared. After that, all those involved in the secret base, Black Penguin, went to jail. Mr. Jones was summoned by the head of state himself and told about the award he deserved. But Mr. Jones shook his head.
Leave these honors. I refuse the medal. It is enough for me that I do my duty.
One evening, when there was a heavy downpour with thunder and lightning flashed in the sky, a threatening shadow appeared near the entrance of the police station of Roblox. It was the well-known Guest 666. In the twinkling of an eye, he got by the front door, and then he was in the hall. Peacefully dozing, a guard didn't even have time to be horrified by the intruder. The criminal grabbed his neck with both hands and squeezed him hard. To be more confident, he stabbed the poor police officer 12 times with a knife. But this wasn't enough for Guest 666. He burst into the sheriff's office and, threatening with a pistol, tied up and gagged him. The sheriff tried to say something, but the gag in his mouth prevented him. Guest 666 didn't care. He set the pistol so that when the door was opened, it would shoot directly at the sheriff. Then he glanced at him and left through the window. Morning came, and the police station filled up with people. The police quickly spotted the dead man on duty and went straight to tell the sheriff about it. When one of the detectives opened the door of the office, which Guest 666 had visited yesterday, the gun shot at the sheriff, and he died. The writing on the wall said Guest 666. The FBI came and quickly cordoned off the police station.
Stop!
The detective, who happened to witness a terrible scene, first examined the crime place, and then asked the local policeman why. In their opinion, the criminal killed the sheriff and didn't touch the parents of the missing children. After all, they were the ones who were involved in the past events related to Guest 666.
So, those involved in the case of Guest 666 were released yesterday by order of the FBI.
What? The detective was completely shocked. And at the same time, it infuriated him that someone dared to interfere in this matter. But immediately, people from the FBI approached him and said that he was completely removed from this case.
No, you can't. It's my business. How dare you?
Yours or not, it's not up to you to decide, so be nice and don't poke your nose here anymore. The detective had no choice but to pretend that he resigned himself and go home. But in fact, he didn't even think about giving up. He started his own investigation. Sitting at home, he began to guess who might be the next victim. And then, suddenly, someone rang the doorbell. The detective went to the door, opened it, but saw only an envelope with text under his feet. It turned out to be an informant who brought him almost all the necessary information through notes. However, even with this, the detective was unable to prevent the terrible crime planned by Guest 666. On that day, the parents who were released from prison gathered together for a picnic in the park to celebrate their release, and of course left the children at home. But it was at that time that Guest 666 decided to visit the family of farmers. The son of the farmers was sitting at home and watching videos on YouTube when he suddenly heard someone break into the apartment and start knocking down the doors. He started to panic and ran to hide under the bed. The son of the farmers heard someone come in. It was Guest 666 examining all of the rooms. Entering the boy's room, the killer walked around it and was about to leave, but then decided to look under the bed. The boy screamed, but no one came to rescue him. Guest 666 grabbed him and forced him to eat until he burst. He ate and cried, but could do nothing about it. The poor boy was tied up and fattened to the extent that he burst. When the parents returned, they were greeted at home by a terrible scene. The whole kitchen was in the remains of their son, and on the wall was a horrifying inscription, Guest 666. The parents immediately called the police. Police and FBI agents, who arrived quickly, cordoned off the scene and collected a few remaining pieces of evidence. They questioned parents and passers-by. They began to take fingerprints from the doors and took away the computer of the farmer's son for verification. The detective, waking up the next morning and hearing about what happened on the radio, realized that it would only get worse.
We must do something, urgently, while the tracks are fresh. And why did the informant avoid informing me earlier?
The detective was very angry and ferocious, but then again, someone rang at the door. It was again the informant. The informant said that Guest 666 is planning another murder. This time, the next student was going to be the victim, and Guest 666 would come to him tonight, got ready quickly, and rushed to the house of a schoolboy who lived on the outskirts of the city. Hiding in the bushes, he was waiting. He had waited almost all night. In the morning, realizing that guest 666 would never come, the detective, even more furious than the last time, went home with nothing. Something strange was there, and the detective felt it. Therefore, he decided to watch the recording from the cameras of the place, where the notes with information were brought to him. He set them there just in case, and such a case finally turned up. In the video, the detective saw how guest 666 himself constantly brought him notes with information about his own crimes, and then calmly left in a black van. While the detective was recovering from what he had seen, guest 666 didn't even think to stop, and the next evening went to the house of another family. Taking out a hammer and nails, he boarded up all the doors and windows. Waking up at night, the family couldn't understand for a long time what these sounds were, and then they smelled smoke. The fire spread rather quickly, and within a few minutes engulfed the entire building. Parents with their son ran to the exit, but the door was blocked with boards. They ran to the window, but there was the same picture. Guest 666 was standing on the street, laughing loudly and muttering something to himself. Then, the family ran to the attic and, jumping through the window into the backyard, went to the neighbors, who had already called the police. In the morning, the military gathered at the house and decided to cordon off the entire city. The captain quickly announced an interception plan and declared a state of emergency. Reporters on all local channels talked only about this, and people sat as if glued to the TV screens, because it was forbidden to go out into the street. Meanwhile, guest 666 was enjoying the hype by watching the news on TV. He even started planning his next crime. He knew every move of the military, since they themselves announced them, and no one could stop him. Guys, thank you very much for watching my videos. I'm really pleased to see this, but if you want even more videos, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This will motivate me to shoot even more videos for you. The general was sitting in his office and didn't know what to do. Guest 666 started a terrible fire, and they were still treading water, even in spite of the measures taken and the state of emergency. As a result, he decided to continue the search for the criminal from the beginning and ordered him to bring him the detective who had conducted the guest's case before. The military immediately went to carry out his order. They took a detachment, weapons in case of resistance, and went to the detective's house.
Hello.
The general ordered to bring you to him. Get into the car. That's an order. The detective was waiting for them, although he was a little shocked by such a scale. He had something to say to the general. Besides, he was glad to return to the game. So, he quickly got into the car, and they drove to the headquarters. Hello, I'm glad to see you here. Thank you for coming. I had no choice, the detective said to himself. I'm happy to serve my country, General. How can I help you? First of all, let me offer you my deepest apologies for your suspension. We can't but acknowledge the contribution that you've made during all the time that you've been engaged in the business of Guest 666.
Yes.
Now, we again need your knowledge and skills in catching the scoundrel. The detective was shocked. It felt like a rag that was just used when needed. But there was nothing to do. I had to agree.
Okay.
In the end, someone has to catch this freak. Great. We're relying on you. Find Guest 666 before he destroys the entire city. The first step was to collect evidence from the crime scene. Therefore, the detective immediately rushed to the burned down house. It was impossible to hesitate. He began to study the remains of the building and the half-burnt inscription left by Guest 666. Meanwhile, Guest 666 was back to work. The next victim he chose was the doctor who used to work at the station and injected Guest with that terrible mutating vaccine.
After all, it's precisely because of the doctor that Guest 666 became a monster. With one kick of his foot, he knocked out the door and burst in. Unfortunately, all family members were in the living room drinking tea. Guest 666 pointed a gun at them and forced the father of the family to tie everyone up. Trembling and sobbing, the doctor followed his order and tied up all of his relatives. "Why do you need to do this? You can kill me, but let them go."
Shut up. I'm here for another. Have you forgotten how you gave me that injection that turned me into a monster? You all knew that it wasn't yet fully explored. Now, I want to do the same with your son.
No way! Guest 666 pointed the gun at the doctor.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure. Only over my corpse.
Well, as you wish.
And Guest 666 immediately shot at the head of the family. And before all the other family members had time to move away from the shot, the offender took the syringe himself, went up to his son, and injected the contents of the syringe into him. Then, Guest 666 laughed and disappeared. The mother, who has escaped from the bonds, immediately called the police and in tears told them everything. Doctors also came and examined the boy. Sadly, they told the mother that it was too late and the vaccine began to work. And it wouldn't be pumped back. The detective immediately rushed in and also began to collect evidence on fresh tracks. He was immediately struck by the numerous traces of dirt on the path to the front door and in the living room. There was also the smell of oil and fuel in the air. It was clear that the killer drove around in a car and isn't very clean, but the detective also had some other suggestions. However, in order to catch Guest 666 for sure, it was necessary to act decisively. Therefore, the detective went to the general with a report and an invented plan. The general, of course, greeted him with a gloomy face. "What do you have, detective?" He reported to him about the evidence from the crime scene. Not much. And what should we do if he wants to kill again?" "I have a plan." The detective said that to catch the criminal terrorizing the entire city was possible only by giving him the opportunity to get closer to his victims and ambush him. The general was at first indignant at such a dangerous operation, but quickly realized that they had no other choice. As a result, it was decided to bring all the participants of Guest 666's case to the house of the military man who created the Black Penguin Project. The house was securely protected by fencing wire, bars on the windows, and guards with the latest weapons.
Yes.
Moreover, there were surveillance cameras everywhere. But everyone understood that wasn't enough for Guest 666. So the detective reinforced the home's defenses with traps. He put up tripwires, put on shotgun traps, and heated up the door handles.
Nice.
Also, the detective thought it wasn't superfluous to spill glue and set nails. According to the detective's assumptions, the killer had only to get a taste. To provoke him even more, the detective asked to report on all TV channels the news that the army and police weren't coping with Guest 666, and they didn't even have a plan. So, the criminal had to overestimate himself, lose vigilance, and quickly move on to the next crime. Having finished with the preparations, the detective, with a calm soul, sat down behind the cells and began to wait. Hour after hour, he sat staring at the monitor, not even taking a break for food. Therefore, exhausted, he fell asleep, dead. At the same time, Guest 666 moved to action. He climbed over the fence and began to crack down on the guards. At first, it seemed that the killer was acting chaotically, but later, it became clear that his path led to the generator. Having reached it, Guest 666 cut off all the cameras. In the office where the detective was sitting, there was a loud hiss. It woke up the sleeping man. Realizing that all the cameras were cut off, he tried to contact the security, but there was no answer. Immediately, somewhere, there was the sound of a broken door, and then shouts and shouts. It was as if there was a whole firefight going on behind the wall. it suddenly became quiet. The detective realized that things were bad and ran into the room to the families. He tried to calm them down and find an emergency exit. At this time, guest 666 quickly moved closer and closer to the coveted room, passing traps and firing back from the guards. Running after the survivors into another room, he burned his hand on a red-hot handle, then stepped on the nails glued to the floor, and nearly fell on the scattered glass toys, tripping over the tripwires. Finally, guest 666 got to his victims and began to threaten them with weapons.
I want to ask you something. Does this city even know the word honesty and justice? Other words have been learned here, such as venality and betrayal. I'm not interested in your social status and the number of money in your pocket. You tried to kill me, but I don't feel pain, and your bullets won't stop me. Thanks to this, I was able to understand who I really am. I'm true evil. I came for you to destroy each of you for what you did to me. Run if you have the strength, but it won't save you.
Panic began. The family members tried to escape, but guest 666 aimed a weapon at them and, making sure that everyone stopped, continued.
Now you'll pay for everything, especially you, detective. I'll kill you first because you deceived me.
Guest 666 shot at the detective, but he dodged and rushed at guest 666. A fierce fight began, but guest 666 turned out to be more dexterous, knocked down the detective, and again aimed the gun at him.
I admit you're strong, and I'm sorry that I deceived you, but let me make amends. There is someone stronger than you.
Guest 666 glared at him.
And who is it?
His name shouldn't be pronounced loudly, otherwise he'll immediately come. Bend over, closer.
Guest 666, eaten by curiosity, bent down, and the detective deftly handcuffed the villain. The detective clanged the second part of the handcuff to himself.
This guest is me,
the detective said, pulled out a grenade, and blew it up. The explosion touched both. The families, realizing what had happened, began to cry, but they suddenly noticed that the detective was still alive. One of them, a military man, approached him and said,
"Thank you for saving us. I'm very sorry that I dragged you into this.
And in general, I'm sorry the experiment resulted in this. I'll never do that again." Soon, an ambulance, police, and military arrived with the general himself.
What a massacre,
thought the general, examining the scene of the crime. Later, all the media reported that guest 666 was defeated. The residents of the city finally breathed a sigh of relief. The detective was posthumously awarded the Roblox Hero Medal for saving the city, and he soon became a legend.